Mercedes are keeping a big secret behind closed doors ahead of the 2024 F1 season, and it's regarding the changes they've made to the rear end of their W15. So while certain changes which have been made to the car are quite easy to guess in some regards, this big secret that is being kept hidden from everyone's eyes and ears pertains to the rear of the car, which is currently shrouded in secrecy. As to what this big secret they're keeping close to their chests regarding the W15's rear end is all about, no one can say for certain, but we have been given some clues thanks to Williams Racing team principal James Vowles during the team's 2024 livery launch earlier in the week during one of his interviews. "We don't want to reveal what's going on at the rear yet," regrets Vowles. And this was a telling statement made by him, particularly so as since the 2022 F1 season, the team have used the Mercedes gearbox and other components, which are transferable under the sport's regulations. This meant that the team now took delivery of Mercedes gearbox and, more tellingly, associated hydraulics. And there is a huge list of components that can be supplied to teams. But to keep matters simple, I'll only include the relevant items that Williams use. And judging from the list, which is on the screen right now, there is quite a few that are used at the rear of the car. For example, we have the inboard rear suspension, the rear suspension members, the rear upright assembly, the rear axles, and gearbox. So, with this list, along with Vowles' statement, it gives us a reasonable guesstimate as to what area has been changed, and more interestingly, perhaps why the team wouldn't want to spoil Mercedes' fun in revealing this themselves whenever they wish to do so. And it all revolves around a change of the rear suspension. Before we move any further with the video, if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing to the Racing Edge, as I'll be covering all 3 days of pre-season testing this year, and of course all of the Grand Prix. Right, back to the video. The team have been rumoured to have switched from a pull rod to pushrod concept for the rear end, as used by McLaren, Alpine, and most notably Red Bull. And this would sit in line with all the other changes that should be present on the W15 at launch. It's all to do with the transfer of load from the rear end to the front of the car while under braking, something that Red Bull have once again been far and away the front runners in this area of development since the start of the ground effect era. So, to keep the explanation short of what Mercedes want to achieve, essentially, they want to minimize the lift at the rear of the car while under braking, so they can keep the floor of the W15 as low to the ground as possible. When braking, the change in pitch shifts the application point of the downforce forwards. The front ring gets closer to the ground, producing more downforce. This is evident on the onboard camera shots that we get of the front ring from race weekends. The floor/diffuser lifts, potentially reducing its downforce, and as a consequence, the car might become unstable during braking. The car then enters the next phase of the braking, which is the driver is now entering the corner and the static pitch angle restricts. The car's rear tires are again pushed more towards the ground than the front, causing understeer and slow turning, the exact opposite of what we want. And this is where Red Bull's anti-dive system comes into play. Essentially, at the front with their new suspension, the inclination of the wrist bones is peculiar as their extension intersects just below the center of mass. This way, only a part of the load transfer produces pitch. Thus, the car remains flat under braking. And I believe this is what Mercedes are trying to create with the W15, and it's why some of the changes at the rear have been hidden, i.e. the change from a pull rod to a push rod suspension layout. And you could argue it's one of the main reasons Red Bull was so far ahead of the field from day one of these regulations at the start of 2022. Now, that's not to say that it has just positives. There are drawbacks from utilizing such a system on the car. For example, an anti-dive geometry transmits higher forces through the suspension components. So therefore, the suspension components themselves must be thicker and heavier. Thus, this increases the weight penalty on a car. And then secondly, there is also the driver issue that they will need to contend with. Since a driver expects the car to dive proportionately to the braking intensity, this is what you see happening when a driver's head goes lower into the cockpit. If this doesn't happen, driver feedback is reduced. And this could be why there was talk from Alex Albon at the Williams livery launch of having to drive the W15 in a totally different manner. But without doubt, the benefits far outweigh the issues, and as such, teams should have been looking to implement their own version of this onto their designs. If any of the other teams are able to implement such a solution like this that is seen on the Red Bull, while making sure it does interact in the desired manner with their own car, they should too reap a huge benefit versus the rest of the grid. And I believe this is why the big secret is being hidden on the W15. So to summarize, where do I think this would all place Mercedes in the pecking order if they were to have successfully recreated Red Bull's anti-dive system on their W15? Well, I think you could quite easily say it's going to make them move a considerable chunk forward. Whether that actually moves them further up in the pecking order from like 4th fastest to 2nd fastest or 3rd to 2nd, only time will tell on that particular front. But all in all, if they can implement these changes, it's only going to be a positive for this season as well as their learnings for the final season before the rule changes for 2026. Right everyone, that is the video. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like, and I will see you all in another Formula 1 video.